She was just the school janitor. At least, that's what everyone thought. But one cold morning, in front of students and teachers, the principal humiliated her, tore her dignity apart with cruel words. What he didn't know is that the woman he mocked was about to hold the key to saving a student's future and teaching him a lesson he'd never forget. Before we dive in, if you believe in stories that open your eyes, touch your heart, and prove that kindness changes everything, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me until the end. Because this is not just about a janitor, it's about courage, redemption, and the power of the human spirit. The hallway smelled faintly of floor wax and freshly sharpened pencils. The quiet before the morning storm of students rushing to their classes. Margaret, the school janitor, moved slowly but methodically, mopping up a muddy footprint trail that stretched from the entrance to the lockers. She'd been at Lincoln High for 12 years, and yet to most people here, she was invisible. That morning, however, she would be anything but invisible. The sharp click of dress shoes echoed down the hall. Principal Bradford, tall, broad-shouldered, with his signature navy suit and a look that could cut glass, approached with his usual air of superiority. Behind him trailed a couple of teachers and 2 members of the school board. He stopped abruptly when he saw Margaret, her mop still wet against the tile. He glanced at the floor, then at her, his jaw tightening. "Really, Margaret?" he said loudly, his voice carrying through the hall. "Do you think it's acceptable to be mopping in the middle of the morning rush? Do you ever consider how unprofessional this looks?" Margaret straightened her back, hands gripping the wooden handle of her mop. She opened her mouth to explain that she had come in early, that the mess was caused by a broken drain near the entrance, but he didn't give her the chance. "Do you understand the kind of image this sends to visitors?" he continued, gesturing toward the board members. "Wet floors, a janitor wandering around while students are trying to get to class. This is not the standard of excellence we promote at Lincoln High." A few students had stopped to watch, whispering among themselves. One teacher looked down awkwardly, pretending to shuffle through papers. Margaret's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to remain silent. She had learned long ago that arguing with men like Bradford only made things worse. Bradford stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not enough that the others couldn't hear. "You need to remember your place, Margaret, and it's not in front of guests." Then, without waiting for her reply, he turned on his heel and walked away with his entourage, leaving her standing there, mop in hand, heart pounding. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the wet floor as if it could swallow her whole. Her job, her dignity, her years of quiet service, reduced to a public scolding that would be replayed in whispers for days to come. But if Principal Bradford thought she would simply shrink away into the shadows, he was wrong, because life had given Margaret more battles than he could ever imagine, and this was just another she would face. Margaret continued mopping as if nothing had happened. Her eyes lowered, but there was something different in the way she moved now. It wasn't the defeated shuffle Bradford expected. Her strokes were steady, precise, almost deliberate. A few students lingered nearby, whispering. One of them, a tall boy with messy hair and a backpack hanging off one shoulder, caught her eye. It was subtle, just a fleeting moment, but in that look, something passed between them. Recognition, understanding. The boy's name was Noah. Most people at school barely noticed him except when he was in trouble. But in that glance, Margaret seemed to see more than his disheveled appearance, more than the troublemaker reputation. She saw the storm brewing in him, a storm she somehow understood. Noah quickly looked away, shoving his hands in his pockets and walking down the hall. But Margaret's eyes followed him, not with suspicion, but with a strange, quiet concern. The bell rang, and the halls filled with noise again. Teachers barked orders, students laughed, lockers slammed shut. Margaret kept working, blending back into the background. But inside, her mind wasn't on the mop anymore. It was on that boy and the memory he had just stirred. She hadn't planned to get involved. It wasn't her place. But life has a way of placing people exactly where they're meant to be, and whether she liked it or not, she was about to be pulled into Noah's story. Principal Bradford's office was a monument to himself. Mahogany desk polished to a mirror shine, a wall lined with framed diplomas, and a massive portrait of him shaking hands with the state governor. Every detail screamed authority and ego. Bradford prided himself on running Lincoln High with discipline and order. In reality, it was more about control. To him, respect wasn't something earned, it was something demanded. That afternoon, he sat across from the vice principal, Mrs. Kane, flipping through a stack of disciplinary reports. His expression was sharp, like a judge preparing a verdict. "This," he said, tapping a file, "is exactly the kind of student we cannot afford to keep here." The name on the file, Noah Turner. Mrs. Kane shifted in her seat. "Noah's grades have been slipping." "Yes, but," Bradford cut her off. "Slipping. The boy is failing 3 classes, constantly late, and just last week, he nearly got into a fight in the cafeteria. He's a distraction. And frankly, I have no patience for distractions." Mrs. Kane hesitated, lowering her voice. "His mother's been ill. He's been taking care of her." Bradford leaned back, smirking. "And whose problem is that supposed to be? This is a school, not a charity. If he can't keep up, then maybe Lincoln High isn't the right place for him." He signed a slip of paper with a flourish, a warning notice 1 step away from expulsion. "Deliver this to him tomorrow. Let's make it clear, 1 more mistake, and he's gone." To Bradford, it was simple. Students were numbers, not stories, and anyone who didn't fit his picture-perfect image of Lincoln High didn't belong. By the time the last student left the building, Lincoln High felt like a different place. The hallways, once loud and chaotic, now echoed with the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint creak of Margaret's cleaning cart. She moved through each classroom with quiet precision, restoring order to the day's chaos. To most people, it was just janitorial work, but for Margaret, it was a way of caring for the school, a place that had been her second home for over a decade. When her shift ended, she didn't go home to a warm, bustling family dinner. She walked to a small apartment 2 blocks away, tucked above a laundromat. It smelled faintly of soap and the lavender sachets she kept in her dresser drawers. Her apartment was simple: a small couch, a chipped kitchen table, shelves lined with well-worn books. But one shelf in particular stood out: textbooks. Not just any textbooks, thick volumes on child psychology, education theory, and behavioral development. Some were marked with sticky notes and pages highlighted in bright yellow. In the corner of her bedroom sat a locked wooden box. Margaret paused in front of it, her hand brushing lightly over the lid. She hadn't opened it in years, but inside were the pieces of a life she had once lived, a life that no one at Lincoln High knew existed. She took off her worn sweater, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window, staring at the street below. Her eyes lingered on the school building in the distance. She thought of Noah, the look in his eyes earlier that day, and the way Bradford had dismissed him without hesitation. She knew that look. She had seen it before, in dozens of young faces over the years. It was the look of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, 1 wrong push away from falling. Margaret sipped her tea slowly. She told herself she didn't have the right or the strength to get involved anymore. But deep down, she knew she wouldn't be able to stay away. Noah Turner sat at the back of his math class, staring at the clock. The numbers on the board swam in front of him, fractions, equations, symbols that made no sense. His pencil tapped against the desk in a steady, frustrated rhythm. He wasn't dumb. He just couldn't focus. Not when his mind was back home, picturing his mother lying on the couch, pale and coughing, struggling to catch her breath. The bell rang. As students spilled into the hallway, Noah stayed behind, stuffing his crumpled homework into his backpack. Riley, his math teacher, approached. "Noah, you're falling behind." "Again," he said softly. "Is everything okay?" Noah shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "I'm fine." It was the answer he always gave. The truth. He was tired, hungry, and 1 notice away from being kicked out of school. He walked to his locker, only to find a folded piece of paper taped to the door. He ripped it off. A disciplinary warning, his final one. His chest tightened. Bradford's handwriting scrawled across the bottom: "1 more incident, and you will be expelled." He crumpled the paper in his fist. This was it. 1 mistake, and he'd lose the only thing standing between him and a dead-end future. He was so wrapped up in his thoughts that he didn't notice Margaret down the hall, watching him from the corner as she wiped down a row of lockers. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She'd seen this before, the signs of a young life about to be written off, and she knew she couldn't just let it happen. 2 days later, the school cafeteria buzzed with the noise of lunchtime chatter and clattering trays. Noah sat at the end of a long table, picking at his sandwich. He hadn't eaten breakfast, but the knot in his stomach made it impossible to swallow. Across the room, a group of older students started laughing, loud, cruel laughter that had Noah's name written all over it. One of them, a stocky boy from the football team, strutted over and swiped Noah's apple off his tray. "Thanks, Turner," the boy sneered, tossing it to a teammate. Noah's jaw clenched. "Give it back," the boy grinned, holding the apple high. "What's the magic word?" Noah stood up. The table scraped loudly against the floor. The cafeteria went quiet for a moment, every eye turning toward them. "Hey," the voice cut through the tension, and it belonged to Principal Bradford. He was striding across the room, face red with anger. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Before Noah could speak, the football player shrugged innocently. "Nothing, sir. Just messing around." Bradford's eyes locked on Noah. "Turner, my office. Now." Minutes later, Noah sat in Bradford's office, staring at the floor as the principal closed the door. "I warned you," Bradford said coldly. "One more disruption, and you're gone." "It wasn't," Noah began, but Bradford cut him off. "I don't care. You've had chance after chance. Lincoln High is not a place for troublemakers." He opened Noah's file and began scribbling on a form. "This is your expulsion notice. Effective immediately." Noah's chest tightened, panic rising like a wave. "Please, you don't understand." But Bradford didn't even look up. "Goodbye, Turner." Outside the office door, unseen by either of them, Margaret stood frozen in the hallway. She had heard everything, and in that moment, she knew if she didn't act now, Noah's future would be lost forever. The next morning, Noah sat alone on the back steps of the school, his backpack slumped beside him. He hadn't told his mom about the expulsion notice yet. He couldn't. She was already too sick, too worried. Margaret approached quietly, a paper bag in her hands. "Breakfast," she said simply, holding it out. Noah looked at her warily. "Why? Because you didn't eat yesterday. Or the day before," she said, sitting down beside him without asking. Her voice was calm, but there was a firmness beneath it, the kind that didn't allow room for lies. Noah hesitated, then took the bag. Inside was a still warm muffin and a small carton of milk. He muttered a quiet thanks and began eating. For a few moments, they sat in silence. Then Margaret spoke. "I heard what happened with Bradford." Noah's shoulders tensed. Double quotes yeah. And "It doesn't matter. I'm done here." Margaret shook her head. "No, you're not." He turned to look at her, confused. "You don't get it. He already decided. I'm out." "That man doesn't decide who you are, Noah," she said, her voice low but steady. Her eyes were sharp, searching his face. "You think I don't recognize that look? That feeling like the world already gave up on you?" Noah frowned. "How would you know?" Margaret leaned back, her gaze distant. "Because once upon a time, I was you." Noah blinked, unsure if she was serious. But something in her tone, the weight in her words, told him she meant every syllable. She stood, brushing off her hands. "Meet me here after school. Don't ask why. Just trust me." And with that, she walked away, leaving Noah staring after her, muffin half-eaten, heart pounding with a strange mix of curiosity and hope. The final bell rang, and students poured out of Lincoln High in a noisy stream. But Noah stayed behind, making his way to the back steps where Margaret had told him to meet her. She was already there, leaning on her mop handle as if it were a walking stick. "You came," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You said I should," Noah replied with a shrug. She motioned for him to follow. They walked down the block, past the corner store, and into a small community center that looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in decades. Margaret pulled out a set of keys and unlocked the door. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the faint smell of coffee and old books. On one wall hung photographs, rows of smiling children holding certificates, medals, and art projects. Noah stopped in front of them. "You run this place?" he asked. "I used to," Margaret said softly. Her fingers traced the edge of a photo, a group of kids she clearly knew by name and heart. "I was a teacher for nearly 20 years. Special education, youth counseling. This center was my life. I helped kids who were on the verge of dropping out, just like you." Noah turned to her, wide-eyed. "So why are you a janitor now?" Margaret took a long breath. "Life happened. My husband got sick. Medical bills piled up. I had to sell the center. And when he passed, the only work I could find was cleaning schools." She gave a faint smile. "But cleaning floors doesn't erase who you are, or what you know." She stepped closer, her voice firm. "Noah, I know you think Bradford's word is final, but I'm telling you it's not. I've seen kids climb out of worse holes than this, if they have someone willing to fight for them. Let me fight for you." For the first time in weeks, Noah felt a flicker of something he thought he'd lost: hope. The next morning, Margaret didn't start her day in the janitor's closet. She marched straight to Principal Bradford's office. Her uniform still smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, but her posture was anything but subservient. Bradford barely looked up from his desk. "Margaret, unless this is about maintenance, it's about Noah Turner," she interrupted, her voice steady but edged with steel. Bradford sighed, setting down his pen. "I've made my decision." The boy's disruptive. "His grades are—" "You haven't made a decision," she cut in again. "You've made a judgment." Without knowing the full story, his jaw tightened. "Margaret, with all due respect," she leaned forward, palms pressing against his desk. "You talk about respect, but you humiliate people. You talk about standards, but you measure students like they're numbers on a spreadsheet. Noah isn't a troublemaker. He's a kid trying to hold his life together while his mother is sick, and you're about to throw him away like garbage." Bradford's face flushed red. "That is enough." "No," she said firmly. "It's not. You have the power to destroy his future with one signature, or you can give him a chance. And if you think I'm going to stand by and watch you ruin him, you don't know me at all." Bradford glared at her, but for the first time, he didn't immediately speak. Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a worn folder. Letters of recommendation from former students, photographs of kids who had gone on to graduate, scholarship award notices. "All of them were written off by people like you," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. "And all of them proved those people wrong." Silence hung between them. Finally, Bradford leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "You're asking me to go against my own policy," he said slowly. "I'm asking you to be a human being," Margaret replied. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Bradford picked up Noah's expulsion notice and tore it in half. That afternoon, Noah sat on the back steps again, certain Margaret's efforts hadn't worked. He didn't even look up when the cafeteria door swung open. "Still skipping lunch?" a familiar voice asked. Noah turned to see Margaret, but she wasn't alone. Bradford stood behind her, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "Noah," Bradford said, clearing his throat, "I may have been too quick to judge. You're not expelled, but you will have to meet with Mrs. Kane twice a week for academic support, and I expect improvement." Noah stared at him, stunned. "You mean I can stay?" Bradford gave a stiff nod. "You can stay." Without another word, he turned and walked back inside. Noah turned to Margaret, his voice barely above a whisper. "You did this," she smiled softly. "You did this. I just reminded someone that your life is worth fighting for." For the first time in weeks, Noah felt his chest loosen. The crushing weight he'd been carrying wasn't gone, but it was lighter now. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but at least now, he had someone walking beside him. Margaret placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone anymore, Noah. Remember that." They sat there for a few moments in quiet, the afternoon sun spilling over the school steps. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Click like to help more people find it. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of compassion. And share this with someone who might need hope today, because sometimes the person you least expect might just be the one who saves you.